Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Marian Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name is Rukmini Banerjee, and I'm one of your 3 Athenaeum Fellows for the year. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy." Well, it has been almost 55 years since Dr. King was alive. His words still ring true today. In 2023, with social injustice seemingly on the rise, it seems as if we ought to learn from the values and wisdom articulated by Dr. King more than ever to endure these unique moments of challenge and controversy. Today, Dean Tamara Lawson will speak about Dr. King's core principles of nonviolence and their continued relevance. She will explain how these principles can be harnessed in the pursuit of social justice and equality, as well as how they can bring value to our own personal journeys as well. Tamara F. Lawson is the Toni Rembe Dean and Professor of Law at the University of Washington School of Law in Seattle. At the University of Washington, Dean Lawson founded the Benjamin L. Crump Center for Social Justice. She also has several leadership positions in the legal community, including with the Law School Admissions Council as well as the National Bar Association. Dean Lawson started her career at Claremont McKenna College as a part of the class of 1992, where she majored in government. She went on to earn a JD from the University of San Francisco School of Law and an LLM from the Georgetown University Law Center. Prior to joining legal academia, Dean Lawson served as a deputy district attorney at the Clark County District Office in Las Vegas, Nevada. As a criminal prosecutor, she worked in the Special Victims Unit and argued multiple cases in front of the Nevada Supreme Court. Dean Lawson is also a renowned teacher and scholar. Her research has appeared in several prestigious law journals, such as the American Journal of Criminal Law and the St. Thomas University of Law. She has written on various subjects, including prosecutorial discretion and stand your ground laws. Today, Dean Lawson will deliver the 2023 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Lecture. In her talk, she will demonstrate the value of Dr. King's principles of nonviolence when creating a more just society as a collective, but also leading more fulfilled lives as individuals. Before we get started, a few quick reminders. Please take this time to silence and put away your cell phones. As usual, video and audio recording by the Athenaeum by the audience is strictly prohibited. Per college policy, it is always recommended to wear a mask when not actively eating or drinking. We have an amazing talk for you today. Be present, get ready to ask some great questions. Welcome to the Athenaeum. We missed you all.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm so glad to be here with you all tonight. Before I begin my remarks, I want to thank all of the organizers. I want to thank your college president. I want to thank your director of the Athenaeum. I want to thank your chief diversity officer who inspires me. I work with her across the nation a lot on projects. And the Athenaeum fellows, all the students that I met today, the pre-law students, the 2 podcasts that we did on constitutional law, and just being a graduate of this fine institution. Thank you. I'm glad to be back on campus, and today was an exciting day. And it filled me with 3 primary emotions. I was filled with pride, I was filled with gratitude, and I was filled with hope. I am so proud of being a CMC graduate, and I am so grateful for the strong foundation that was built in me here at CMC. The foundation that allowed me to pursue my passions. It was here at CMC that I learned to be a critical thinker, an independent thinker. And I tell my students, it's fine to be part of a group, but don't let the group think for you. You must be your own critical thinker. You must be your own independent thinker. And it was here as a government major that my curiosity was sparked in laws and rules and the exercise of discretion. And I still have my dog-eared pages of the Federalist Papers and de Tocqueville, Democracy in America in the Dean Suite in Seattle. And I refer to those texts more often than you would think, as issues of democracy come up in our daily discourse watching cable news, if you can so stomach it. I am grateful for my substantive writing skills, my senior thesis even, right? What an invaluable experience that was, and it distinguishes, in my opinion, the richness of the education here at CMC. Recently, I was showing my senior thesis to a very prominent attorney, and he said, "What is that, your dissertation?" I said, "No, that is my undergraduate thesis," and he wanted to know, where did I go to school? Little did he know about CMC. But while grateful, I can't stop thinking back to my freshman self. And when I lived in Appleby Hall in the 80s, yes, I lived on campus in the 80s, I never envisioned that I would be writing about racial bias in the criminal justice system, or launching a center for social justice, or training new lawyers at the top law school of the Pacific Northwest. But really, if I think deeply about it, it's not surprising when you consider both my family background and my educational foundation at CMC. You see, my family's from the South, Louisiana in particular, and my grandfather, born in 1888, instilled in our family a strong principle to never give up and to consistently fight for justice. And that foundation and that core principle was even deepened, the commitment for it was deepened here at CMC. I still remember my first time at the Ath, and I told some students earlier tonight, I remember it almost as if it was yesterday. I was here as a freshman to hear civil rights icon Julian Bond, a trailblazer in civil rights in his own right, even though we're here tonight to talk about Martin Luther King. But Julian Bond and Martin Luther King were colleagues and friends. And I would suggest to you that who your friends are matters. The conversations you are in matters. The mentors that you have matters. And where you were trained matters. Julian Bond was one of the original leaders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. You might have heard of it in anything you studied about the civil rights movement. And the students at that time, they led the sit-ins in segregated lunch counters. You might have heard of that. And also, they were in charge of the freedom rides during the bus boycotts. Julian Bond was the first president of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and he was the chairman of the NAACP from 1998 to 2010. Julian Bond and Dr. Martin Luther King were not just friends and colleagues in the civil rights movement, they were trained at the same college. More on that in a moment. But when I look back on it, I believe it was the experience here in this room, here at the Athenaeum, where the additional fuel was added to my existing passion for law and justice. And when I was asked to give this address, I thought about how education shapes individuals and maybe even shapes social movements. My education definitely shaped me. And as we discussed tonight, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his education definitely shaped the foundation that was built in him to lead a nation, to change its laws, and to change its thinking about race, equity, and fairness. And as I embraced being back on campus today, the third emotion that overwhelmed me is hope. I have so much hope for the bright futures in this room. You inspired me all today, and I can't wait for the Q&A. But the exciting thing about hope, and I think the psychologists say it's the strongest emotion, it requires us to be focused on the future, to be forward-looking. And Dr. Martin Luther King was always forward-looking too. Excuse me. As we begin our conversation and discussion tonight, let's look forward, right? Very hopeful. And we don't want to ignore the importance of history and the importance of legacy as we pay tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. But I ask each of you to consider, what is your legacy? What are your core values? What do you want your impact in the world to be? Okay, maybe that's too hard. Maybe that's not fair of me to ask you at this young age, at this early stage in your career. But Julian Bond and Dr. Martin Luther King were your age when they were leading and speaking and impacting change. I know it's hard to really envision it in those terms. Maybe another way to think about it is, are you willing to operationalize your values? When I speak to new law students at orientation, I ask them to step into the future with me. Step into your future with me. How do you envision it? I see it filled with many opportunities. You might see it filled with challenges and obstacles and concerns, but I see opportunities. You might see it with doubt. You might have self-doubt right now on what you can achieve. But I suggest to you to dare to dream big. Dream big about your future. There are no limits to your future. Dr. Martin Luther King did not put limits on his vision, and that was truly part of his success. He was bold. He was courageous. Dr. Martin Luther King's greatest legacy was his commitment to nonviolence. And when we see the archival footage and read the accounts of the extreme and routine violence of that time against Black people, it's hard to imagine advocating for nonviolence and peaceful solutions, but he did. He put no limits on America and what they could accomplish. But in MLK terms, in Dr. King's terms, he might ask you the same question in another way. He would say, what is your blueprint? In a speech he gave to young people in Philadelphia in 1967, entitled, What is Your Life's Blueprint? Dr. King shared with the students, what you do now and what you decide now may well determine how your life will go. Dr. King compared planning life and planning your goals to that of an architect. And an architect is planning a building or planning a city or planning a community. He said, the key to that project is that you must have a strong blueprint. And he was kind enough to share with us what is necessary for a strong blueprint. He said you have to have 3 things for a strong blueprint. First, dignity and worth. Your blueprint must have a deep belief in your own dignity and worth. In Dr. King's words, he would say, know that you are somebody. And he would say, don't let anybody make you feel like you're nobody. Always feel that you count, and that you have worth, and that your blueprint is structured in a way that your life should have significance. He would tell you that the second key component to your life's blueprint is excellence. That your blueprint must have excellence, determination to achieve excellence in all your endeavors. Whatever your life's work will be, do it better than any living person or dead could do it better. Do it the best, right? He was famous for a quote about the street sweeper. I don't know if you've heard that quote where he said, if you're a street sweeper, sweep that street in the same way Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. And that you should do excellence in even small things. And that doors of opportunity will open. Be ready to enter those doors when they open. He encouraged young people to study hard, to burn the midnight oil, and to stay in school. And the third final key component to your life's blueprint is beauty, love, and justice. Your blueprint must contain a commitment to the eternal principles of beauty, love, and justice, according to Dr. King. He said, you have a responsibility to make your nation a better nation for everyone. He always encouraged young people to keep going. He was famous for saying, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving forward. And in these speeches, when he spoke to audiences of young people, he spoke to build their confidence and to empower their vision. So, with Dean Lawson and Dr. King, step into the future with me, your future, with your blueprint prepared to build a strong foundation for your career. We can talk more about that. But a key part of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, the history that's not often discussed, was where was Dr. King trained? How was he trained? Where was he trained? He was in the right place to grow to be a world leader. I suggest to you that you, too, are in the right place, right? I'm uniquely qualified to say that you are in the right place to grow and to launch into a sphere of influence that could change the world. Dr. King was nurtured in an environment that built his personal confidence, recognized his talent and promise. He was in an environment of substantive, deep thinkers and innovators of his time. Your foundational training matters. The conversations and communities in which you engage matters. Dr. Martin Luther King was part of an early admissions program. Very few people talk about this, that he was part of an early admissions program at Morehouse College. And this program was funded by the Ford Foundation, and he entered college at age 14 and graduated at age 18, and then he received an additional scholarship to go and attend Boston University and also took classes at Harvard University. And Dr. King was very much influenced by his professors, and in particular, he was very much influenced by the president of Morehouse, Dr. Benjamin Mays. Dr. Benjamin Mays was the son of a South Carolina sharecropper. And Dr. Mays became a dean at Howard University, and then he next became the president of Morehouse College, where he served as president for 27 years. And Dr. Mays, at that time, he angered his father as he pursued education. And his father told him, "You're aiming too high," when he left the farm to go to college in 1916. And he received his master's and doctorate from the University of Chicago. And he received 45 honorary degrees from other colleges in law, divinity, and humanities. And notwithstanding all of these honors and accomplishments, Dr. Mays said the biggest honor in his life was that he had the opportunity to teach, inspire, mentor, and train Martin Luther King Jr. at Morehouse. Martin was first exposed to the theory of nonviolence by Dr. Mays, the president of Morehouse, due to his travels to India with the president at the time, President Johnson of Howard University, and their conversations and study of Mahatma Gandhi and nonviolence theory. It's important to remember the origin story of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King was not hatched. He did not magically become one of the world's greatest leaders. He was trained, he was nurtured, he was developed, he was supported. He was a student of very wise professors and intellectual leaders, just like all of you in this room, right? Not only was Dr. Mays Dr. King's mentor and teacher, we have to remember the other side of that relationship, that Dr. King, young Martin, was a good mentee. He was a good student. And he excelled in the training that he received to lead an entire movement. And a key point that Dr. Mays shared in interviews is that Martin spent time with his professors. He stayed after class and came and talked to his professors outside of class. I think that's what we call nowadays as office hours, right? So he was a frequent attendee in office hours. And I think that's something to think about and how you can really grow your own intellectual capacity and role in the world. But Dr. Mays was Dr. Martin Luther King's intellectual father, and he taught all of his students to aspire to be great. Dr. King was given a strong foundation, just as you are being given here. His professors, his mentors, his peers helped him. They allowed him to grow, to mature, and to excel. And just like Martin, you have lots of choices on how you build your intellectual strength and who you associate with and whose iron you let sharpen your iron, right? And I know that this is the environment in which you can engage your mind to be a world leader also and grow into your full self. CMC is an amazing place from which you will launch. But as we lean in and learn more about Dr. Martin Luther King, he is famous for the civil rights movement and its principles of nonviolence and his embrace of those principles and use of that tool even in the face of violence, serious violence. So let's talk briefly about what are the core principles of nonviolence. The first principle of nonviolence is that it takes courage to choose nonviolence. It was not popular or easy to choose nonviolence, particularly in the face of violence. Next, that the work and the goal of nonviolence is to build friendship and understanding. That the objective of nonviolence theory is to defeat injustice, not to defeat people. And understanding nonviolence is a willingness to accept violence, but not a willingness to inflict violence. And under nonviolence theory, you choose love instead of hate. And you have a core belief that the universe is on the side of justice. So Dr. King faced real violence, and he used these theories. So, that's a particular context. Do these theories apply now? I suggest that every day we have the opportunity to practice nonviolence. Each of us makes a choice daily on how we engage with our communities. Will you choose nonviolence? Will you be courageous, which is the first step of nonviolence? Will you pursue friendship and understanding, even across difference, even if it's uncomfortable or unfamiliar? I think we call that DEI a lot of times. I call it belonging. Will you choose love instead of hate, even in an era where hate crime is on the rise? Will you choose love? Will you lead others to choose love? Will you champion work that is targeted at defeating injustice, not at defeating people, even in our current polarized dialogue, seemingly polarized almost about everything? I want to give a nod to the courage of the students here, because I know part of the DNA of being a CMCer, and it's built into your training as leaders to do this type of work. As leaders, as intellectual powerhouses, I know that you're dynamically engaged in the issues of the day. I often say to my students that if you think you're among the smartest people in the room, and again, I'm biased, I think among the CMCers we have the smartest people in the room, you are also responsible to bring solutions to the table. And Dr. King said you also have the additional responsibility to make your nation better and make it better for everyone. You know, Dr. King warned us about the problem of remaining vigilant, remaining awake and not asleep. He gave a famous speech at Oberlin College entitled "Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution." He said in that speech, anyone who feels that we can live in isolation today, anyone who feels that we can live without being concerned about each other, about other individuals, about other nations, is sleeping through a revolution. The world is one, we live as one geography. We are geographically linked. We are linked more than that. At the University of Washington, we have this motto that everything global is local and everything local is global. What can you do in your sphere of influence to impact change? Can you make philanthropic change? Can you make change on inclusion and belonging? Can you make change as it relates to access and excellence? And I'm a believer of growing where you're planted. And here at CMC, you are launching into the next phase of your leadership. Dr. King was always looking forward, and he was always looking for a solution. And in another famous speech, he talked about "Where do we go from here?" was the title of that speech. And he acknowledged some of the successes, and I think that's relevant to our discussion today. You know, some would say we're in a post-racial moment. We're definitely post-segregation, I would say, but some would also suggest, they say it less often than they used to, but we're in a post-racial moment. Or maybe you might say we're in a post-racial reckoning moment. And we can talk more about that. But Dr. King noted even then that although we had made strides in education and in voting rights and other areas, he said, "I would be dishonest with you if I gave you the impression that we have come to the point where the problem is almost solved. We are still working on some of the same issues that Dr. King worked on in his lifetime. But I am thrilled to be part of this conversation and the engaged dialogue around the legacy of Dr. King. And what I want to impart upon you tonight is to think about, in his legacy, what behavioral commitments are you willing to live consistent with your values? Dr. King showed us that behavioral commitments outlast and overcome the forces of fear, ignorance, and hate, but only if you are intentional and only if you follow through. And behavioral commitments can seem daunting, but I suggest to you that it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier if you have real friends. And real friends aren't just people that you can have a great time with. Those are easy to find. Real friends are the people you are growing with. They are the friends that are willing to listen, the friends that are willing to learn, the friends that are willing to change their opinion. They are the people who take action and take action consistent with your values. So let's lean in on the meaning and the legacy of Dr. King. You know, Dr. King was very conscious that his life might be short. But he was also very adamant that his life would have meaning. I urge us to give his legacy import and impact by bringing these principles into our daily lives. Now, some of you are already practicing core principles of nonviolence, so I want to acknowledge that in the room. But there are large pockets of American society that are not practicing principles of nonviolence. In their social media and in real life, many are practicing verbal violence, physical violence, shootings, hate crimes, political disagreement that leads to outbursts of violence, even mob violence. What would our life be like if we pursued the core principles of nonviolence? Friendship and understanding, love not hate, defeating injustice, not defeating people. I suggest to you, what if you tried that on for size? What if you practiced nonviolence for a day, adopted it as your way of life? What if you did it for 30 days and reflected on the difference? Send me a note and let me know how it impacted you, how it impacted your life. I want to impress upon you that the work of Dr. Martin Luther King is not simply historic. It is dynamic, and it is part of our American fabric. I encourage you to embrace it, to apply it. And I challenge you even further to adopt the principles of nonviolence in your leadership legacy. Let's collectively embrace these principles together. There is much that remains to do. There's so much work still to do, to remain awake, to choose peace, not war, love, not hate, to choose understanding and not division. It's not easy, but it's very important. And it's critical, and justice depends on it. And in closing, I just want to circle back to those three emotions that overwhelmed me this day, and we started our discussion tonight with: pride, gratitude, and hope. I am proud. I'm a proud American. I'm proud of my ability to speak freely with you, to freely assemble here, to freely grow and learn at Claremont McKenna College with you. And I'm proud of the legacy of our American Nobel Peace Prize winner who led this nation in the civil rights movement with steadfast principles of nonviolence. I am grateful. I stand here with gratitude. Gratitude of the high price that Dr. Martin Luther King paid. The ultimate price that he paid to pave the way and to break down barriers for so many of us, including me. And I stand here with hope. Hope for the future, hope for each student here, the next generation, right, of empowered leaders to practice the core principles of nonviolence in your leadership and achieve the next waves of triumphs in the sphere of justice. And as my final point, sadly, many of the issues of Dr. Martin Luther King's day remain. And some of those injustices that he fought for have yet to be eliminated. But our life's work is about relationships. And I am thrilled to be in a dialogue with all of you in a committed relationship for justice together. Let's get to work. Thank you.
Incredibly inspirational. I'm sure the students have many great questions. So we will now transition to the Q&A portion of the evening. So please come up, line at either of the mics. We're going to alternate between the two. And when you come up to ask your question, make sure to introduce yourself. Say your name, your class, as well as your major.
Hi, my name is George. I'm a sophomore at CMC. I'm a PPE major. Thank you so much for your talk. One question I had, is if you could elaborate a little bit more on what the principles of nonviolence look like outside the realm of protest. And you mentioned these principles that are very broad and could apply to a number of situations. So I'm thinking particularly about, in the context of social justice work, maybe in politics or other sort of related spheres that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. worked in to achieve his vision. What can nonviolence look like more particularly in some of those areas?
Thank you, George. Thank you for your question. And I think it's very meaningful to think of these nonviolent principles in all aspects of our life and how we carry ourselves on the day-to-day, and that was what I was trying to impart on us. I'm as a leader myself and having, running a staff in a law school, I think about that and how I'm going to interact with a student, how I'm going to interact with an employee in any challenging situation, to have a measured approach, to think of the justice consequences of where you're going, what is your end goal. When you're dealing with humans, right, it's sometimes a challenge to resist emotions of anger, rage, revenge, spite. And I think these are what Dr. King is talking about at the core of what the principles of nonviolence are about. So you talk about politics. I really kind of don't want to talk about politics, but when we think about violence and nonviolence, there are so many recent examples that we could think of as we try to pursue our democracy, right, as informed citizens, as empowered citizens, citizens with free speech, that speech should not cause violence to other people, let alone actual violence that we're seeing, exhibit itself for politics or whatever other issue. So I guess what I'm trying to say is how you would apply it is you would think of ways to engage your community and to engage the goal of your justice proposition without causing harm, with only defeating the issue that's unjust as opposed to attacking people, which we see a lot of that in social media and on the news and other things. And to have that as part of your blueprint, like your structure of how you're going to approach problems, is what I'm suggesting as incorporating nonviolence into your leadership.
Thank you so much.
How's it going?
Hello.
My name is Thomas. I'm a first year, and my major is international political economy over at Pitzer. So my question was similar to George's in regards to the core principles of nonviolence. One of the principles you talked about was defeat injustice, not people. And I had a little question about that. So I think it's really easy to, or it's not easy, but one can attack an institution, but it's super hard when you see an individual doing and practicing injustice. And it's really hard to not condemn them and just kind of try to find a greater solution. So how should one work around that?
Okay, that's a great question. So I don't know that the principles of nonviolence are claiming not to have accountability for wrong behavior. So if that's what you're alluding to, an individual doing wrong behavior, I think if there was some accountability for that behavior, that would still be consistent with nonviolence. But I think what would be inconsistent with nonviolence is seeking to solve whatever problem by trying to defeat the person. And we've all seen this happen, that we lose sight of our ultimate objective because we're so focused on revenge or some kind of retribution to an individual, that they should pay or they should feel the same pain we had to feel, or there's other theories around this. Restorative justice, you could imagine, is also embedded in the principles of nonviolence. But I'm suggesting, as we map out our action plan, we recognize when our human nature takes us in that direction and we say, oh no, even though that might seem good, or we can envision how that might feel good for a brief moment, it is inconsistent with our core values, and it's also inconsistent with our objective, and it might take us further in the reverse than it will take us forward. And you can think about debates in your mind's eye. Dr. King and Malcolm X, they had two different approaches to the same goal. And so I'm suggesting that you use these nonviolence principles to a broader range of problems than just the problems that Dr. Martin Luther King faced.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is
Hello.
Johannes Brown. I'm a first year here at CMC, neuroscience major. I guess the one question I have is, like, in your research of MLK, I guess, like, in what ways do you feel that, like, nonviolence has its own, like, shortcomings in which there's problems that not particularly can't be solved through nonviolence, but, like, could be better solved in other methods, if that makes sense?
Okay. That's a good question. I have to admit that I'm all in on the nonviolence, because I think that even though there might be some temporary shortcomings, I think there's so many more long-term gains. And that was, an active, real debate during the civil rights movement. And there's an interview, if you check it out on YouTube, there's several interviews with colleagues of Dr. King during the civil rights movement. There's an interview with Andrew Young, and he talks about how there would be these intense fights among the leaders and on how they were approaching things. And apparently Andrew Young was assigned by Dr. King to make sure these fights never got too out of hand, these arguments and things. And one of the times, Dr. King pulled Andrew Young aside and said something like, I I don't mind dying for the cause, but I'm not going to die over BS. I don't want to die over the egos and the, tempers flaring. And so, the violence approach, what is the saying? Violence begets violence. And I think that continues and starts to build on itself. So the ultimate harm of the violence approach is it's hard to stop it. Where do you stop it? So even though you might not get as far as fast with a nonviolence approach, I think your ultimate trajectory is longer. There's a quote of Dr. King. He says, "The arc of justice is long." So he even gives us that window of time that justice doesn't come this quickly, that we also have to have patience as we pursue these large projects and large justice initiatives. But that's a really good question, and it's been a debate for decades among leaders on which way to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Luke. I'm a freshman at CMC as well, studying environment, economics, and politics. And funny enough, I actually had an extremely similar question to Johanan, but I think I could add to it a little bit. Because one of the more convincing arguments I've heard in favor of the use of violence is as a last resort. I think Nelson Mandela had that belief that if a people find themselves in an existential struggle, and as a last resort for self-preservation, violence is perhaps warranted. And I was wondering, because you said you were pretty all in on the nonviolence approach, if you had a rebuttal to that argument, because I'm curious to hear.
Well, I think the question that you're both circling around might intersect with the human right principle of self-defense. And I don't know if you're really going that far with it, but I also believe in that principle. But core to the principles of self-defense are necessity, right? Is it an imminent threat? Is it necessary to respond? And what level of response is proportionate to the threat? And the American culture has embraced the ultimate level of violence as a first resort and not going through those steps of whether deadly force is even necessary. Have you tried other types of solutions before you go to the nuclear solution? And even having nonviolence principles on your checklist at least pauses you to make sure you're not overstepping even if you do choose violence. Because we see that in our communities all the time. It's not just proportionate violence. It's disproportionate violence. It's unjust violence. It's unarmed and then 35 bullets. It's, we could go on with examples of people and shootings and violence that is not really even in that context of last resort. But I hope that answers your concern a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. I was curious.
Hi, I'm Emma.
Hi.
I'm a sophomore at Claremont McKenna College. I'm studying psychology and film studies and with a legal study sequence. I'm wondering, you were mentioning how there are different forms of nonviolence and different aspects of it. So I'm wondering, when us as college students, after going into the society, working maybe for the system, how do we navigate in this kind of conflict between wanting to adopt nonviolence and also working for a system that might promote violence in some aspect, especially in the legal profession?
Are you saying violence in the death penalty,
Or just in general? For example, if I work in law, there's a huge aspect of law that promotes violence in not law, but the entire government system that promotes it. So if we want to change it as individuals, but also we're working in it as an occupation, how do you think we can adopt nonviolence in this setting?
Okay. I'm trying to think of the examples in which the government is promoting violence, so maybe military violence. Dr. King would advocate peace, not war. He's been quoted saying that all the time. But as a lawyer, there is a limit to the nonviolence theory in that way, because when we swear to be officers of the court, follow the laws of the state, there are some state laws, and I thought that's where you might have been referring to also the death penalty in some states. That would be the law of the state. But again, I go back to the proportionality concern. Even when violence is selected as an option, are we using it appropriately or proportionately? I guess another area where the government could be doing violence is in the military, but theoretically we're using military violence in a self-defense context, not in an aggressive war context or defending others context. So I think at the core of your question, though, is asking to advocate for policies that better pursue a nonviolence outcome that has a stronger arc of justice and sustainability in the community, as opposed to the short-term, what I believe are short-term solutions when the policy is grounded in violence, and violence that ripples through communities in a different way. So that's my best on that one.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. My name's Rachel. I'm a senior. I study literature. I'm curious if you think the principles of nonviolence are compatible with our justice system, and you know, if they're not compatible with like the current justice system, what's the best way to be adapting this system?
I think that scholars might criticize me if I were to say that they're consistent. But I think there's gradations of consistency. So maybe the nonviolent principles would best align with misdemeanor offenses, offenses of that can be diverted, and kind of treatment programs that can be attached to first offense issues and drug use, etc. But I don't know how far that can go when we're dealing with the accountability issue that we were talking about before, and true, like murderous, homicidal attacks, and particularly multiple homicidal attacks. So there are limits as far as accountability when you're dealing in the rears. Like in a criminal justice system is not trying to we're not talking about the prevention of violence. We're talking about the accountability after violence occurs. So many prosecutors' offices in this movement towards progressive prosecution are trying to get ahead of crimes in the community and have programs in place to reduce crime. So that would be consistent with nonviolence. But once homicides occur, we're not really at that same arc and same point to impact a nonviolent resolution.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Dean Lawson for the wonderful appearance at the Athenaeum today.
Thank you.